Today I'm going to be looking through this magazine. It's an SFX magazine special from 2001, and it was all about ranking the 20 best movies, TV shows, books and comics in the SF and fantasy genre. So I thought it might be interesting to go through it and see how those lists stand up today. There's an advert for Black Star there. I spent a lot of money with them before Play.com, and then Amazon took over. Right, on to the top 20 TV shows. First up, at 20, it's UFO. I tried watching this recently, but it's very slow, and every episode is basically the same, so it hasn't really held up. At 19, The Storyteller. Yes, this is a classic. I haven't seen it for a while though, maybe I should. At 18, Monkey. I've never seen this one, but I'm sure I'll get around to it someday. 17, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Now we're talking. I was 6 years old when this came out, and it was possibly the first science fiction show that I was ever really a fan of. Later on I discovered that the books and radio shows were arguably better versions of the story, but I'll always have a soft spot for the TV version. At 16, Babylon 5. I was a huge fan of this at the time, but looking back the effects have dated and the acting is a bit dodgy too. But you can't deny the epic scope of the writing and storytelling. It was way ahead of its time with its 5-year-long story arc, which went on to become standard procedure for most genre shows. At 15, Farscape. Another one that I was a big fan of at the time, but I think it's probably held up a lot better than Babylon 5, mainly because of the sense of humour. It never took itself too seriously, and it's definitely ripe for a sequel or a reboot. At 14, Batman the Animated Series. I never really got into this. It aired after I'd grown out of kids' cartoons, and before I realised that cartoons could be for adults as well. But what I've seen of it is really good. At 13, Batman 60s version. I haven't seen this one since I was a kid. I'd quite like to be honest. It was certainly very influential. Decades of newspaper headlines about comics had the same biff bam pow comics aren't just for kids anymore format, due entirely to the legacy of this show. At 12, Star Trek The Next Generation. A very odd picture they've chosen to illustrate it. This was my Star Trek growing up. Loved it to bits. And the characters continue on today in Star Trek Picard. At 11, Twilight Zone. Yeah, I've never seen this. It's one of those shows I've always meant to watch, but never got round to. So maybe I will next time it's repeated. At 10, Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Yeah, it took me a while to get into this, as I thought it was inferior to Babylon 5 at the time. But the darkness and story arcs and character development means now I probably enjoy it a lot more than Next Generation. At 9, Twin Peaks. Another one of my all-time favourites. I would put this one a lot higher. And of course, since the magazine came out, we had a whole new series, which was basically one long David Lynch movie. Not as enjoyable as the original series, but an incredible watch all the same. At 8, Quatermass. Another one of those shows that I've never seen but always meant to. And yes, there is a pattern emerging, it's mainly the black and white shows. At 7, Angel. Again, I loved this at the time, as it was basically a darker version of Buffy. Some would argue that it's better than Buffy overall, but I think it's too close to call. At 6, we have The Prisoner. Yes, I've seen this a few times, and didn't really understand it. One of those classic 60s shows that's way ahead of its time. At 5, Doctor Who. I mean, what can you say? It's one of my all-time favourites, and I'm still rewatching it now for my series of season-by-season video reviews, which you can see on this same channel every 6 to 8 weeks. At 4, The X-Files. Yes, I was slightly obsessed with this at the time, but as the years have gone on, I realised that only the first 4 or 5 seasons were any good. And when they brought it back a few years ago, it was even worse. Still, you can't deny it has a ton of really good episodes. They just aren't the ones I thought were really good at the time. At 3, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Another one that I was obsessed by at the time. It's fallen out of favour recently, as Joss Whedon is apparently a horrible person. But it wasn't a one-man show, and the rest of the cast and crew did an incredible job, being one of the best series ever to life. 2. Sapphire and Steel. I watched this a few years ago when the DVD came out. Didn't really understand it, but the best episodes are still pretty spooky. I certainly wouldn't rate it this high though. And at number 1, the original series of Star Trek. Can't really argue with this one. It's an absolute classic. So overall, it's a very strong list. I've seen all but 3 of them. Personally, I'd put Doctor Who, Twin Peaks and Buffy a lot higher up on my own list. But then I'd want to have newer shows like Red Dwarf and Battlestar Galactica in there as well. And definitely a couple of the Star Trek shows. So yeah, overall I can't really complain. Next we have a section devoted to SF's sexiest hunks and babes. SFX magazine used to have lots of photos of sexy women in an attempt to compete with the likes of FHM and Loaded. And then they added photos of men to balance it out, which is how you end up with this. I'm sure Angelina Jolie and Keanu Reeves would have been thrilled to be included in a section like this, along with a cast of Angel. Then we have an advert for X-Files and Buffy DVDs. There's no price on them, but I'm pretty sure they were about £50 or £60 each, which at the time I thought were a bargain. Now you can get the entire series on Blu-ray for about 20 quid. Anyway, moving on to the top 20 films. At 20 we have Mad Max 2. I'm not really a fan of this series. I have seen them all over the years. I'd probably rank Thunderdome better than this one. And Fury Road is much better still, but this was still many years away at the time of publication. At 19, Tremors. I mean, this is a good, fun B-movie. Very enjoyable, but I certainly wouldn't put it as one of the best of all time. At 18, Wings of the Honyamis. It's an anime movie, looks like, and I've never seen it, or indeed heard of it. At 17, Unbreakable. This is definitely M. Night Shyamalan's best movie, still to this day. Again, I made an entire video about this, which you can see if you look back through my content. At 16, An American Werewolf in London. Yep, great movie, perfect blend of horror and comedy, which a lot of filmmakers have been trying to copy ever since. At 15, Planet of the Apes, the original one. Nowadays there's a strong argument to be made that Dawn or Rise of the Planet of the Apes might deserve a place in one of these lists, but the original version is certainly a classic. At 14, Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's a great movie. I'm not really sure it counts as science fiction or fantasy, unless you count the bit with the Ark of the Covenant at the end. I guess it does count. Okay, fair enough. At 13, The Terminator. Fantastic movie. You could argue endlessly whether this or Terminator 2 most deserves a place in one of these lists. And there's a strong argument to be made for both. At 12, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. I haven't seen this version, but I have seen the remakes in the 70s and 90s. And I think we're overdue for another one. 11, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I'm ashamed to say I haven't actually seen this one. I know I should, as I'm a big fan of science fiction and Spielberg and UFOs, but somehow this one has passed me by. I'll definitely have to check it out as soon as possible. At 10, Metropolis. I think I've seen this one, but being a silent black and white movie, I don't really remember much about it. I'll have to watch it again someday. Maybe it'll be re-released in cinemas for the 100th anniversary. That would certainly be an event. At 9, Blade Runner. Yes, another classic. Seen it many times in many different versions. Obviously the first director's cut is the best. At 8, King Kong. 90 years old, and still probably the best version of this story. At 7, Alien. Another absolute classic. Perfect mixture of horror and science fiction. Aliens isn't on this list, but it probably should be. At 6, Star Wars. I mean, what can you say about this? It's quite low on the list, but it definitely belongs there. As does this, The Empire Strikes Back at number 5. And this is certainly better than A New Hope. And both movies definitely deserve to be on this list. At 4, A Matter of Life and Death. I have not seen this one, but it does come on television quite often, so I might have to check it out someday. At 3, The Bride of Frankenstein. Again, I haven't seen it, but I am quite curious, as I have seen a few versions of Frankenstein, but I've never seen one of the sequels. Actually quite surprised they've never bothered to remake this one. At 2, Brazil. Yeah, great movie, probably the best thing Terry Gilliam has ever done. And at 1, it's Forbidden Planet. Yeah, this was a hugely influential movie. Star Trek is basically Forbidden Planet the series, so in a way it's come top on both lists. It feels a bit slow and stiff nowadays, but you can't deny it's a classic. So again, that's a solid list, spread out over the last 100 years of cinema. There are some obvious omissions though, like 2001, E.T., Back to the Future, or indeed the sequels to some of the movies already on the list. I've seen all but 5 of these, and I will certainly try to catch the others whenever I get the chance. Okay, this video is getting quite long, so I will leave the discussion of the books and comics lists for another time. If you don't want to miss that video, then press subscribe. And I'll see you next time.